Wonderful. So welcome everyone. My name is Caitlin. I'm the program coordinator for the Memory Project. Keep letting people in while we do this. And today I have the very distinct pleasure and honor of introducing our special guest, uh, Able Wren, Gwen Settle, who is retired, though you wouldn't know it from all the activities that she still does to this day. Gwen was part of a specialized team of women in the Women's Royal Canadian Navy, known more affectionately as the Wrens. They tracked, analyzed, and reported Soviet submarine movements during the Cold War, and their work in anti-submarine warfare was highly classified for decades. Uh, so 60 years later, she's actually able to tell us her stories and experiences, and she's joined us today. Welcome, Gwen.
My pleasure to be here.
So to jump off the bat, why did you join the Wrens?
Well, I came from a military family. My father and uncle had been in the Navy for about 23 years. My aunt was in the Air Force during the war, and my older brother had joined the Army. So military was something that I was used to. And when I was about 5, 6 years old, when I was upstairs, supposed to be in bed, I would sit on the landing and listen to Dad with some of his Navy buddies tell all their stories and so on. And I thought, oh, that would be such an adventurous life. I want to do that. So from a young age, that's something I had always wanted to do.
And what was the process like when you tried to join?
Well, I had to wait until I was 18. I graduated high school, but I had to wait until August, till my birthday. And then the first intake after that wasn't until October. So I actually joined at the recruitment center in Ottawa on October the 15th, 1962.
So right at a point when tensions were very, very high. And what responsibilities did you have once you joined?
Well, first off, we had to go through basic training and do all the standard stuff, get issued with our uniforms, and they did all kind of tests and so on, so they could determine which trade we would be suitable for. And I had always wanted to go into naval operations. I didn't want to go into communications or administrative things. I wasn't. I never took any office skills in high school because uh, I was never going to work in an office. Never say never. Anyway, I wanted naval operations, and as luck would have it, that's where the Navy decided to put me. From that, I went to the base in Halifax called Stadacona, and that's where we got our trades training. So we learned all the various things, radar, sonar. I even had a 3-day engineering course. And I always thought I was sort of a mediocre, average type of student and so on. But apparently, I was one of the top ones in the class. So I was one of the ones chosen to go on specialized training for what would become my trade, which at that time was called oceanographic research. And with that, I was sent on a training course to, along with 11 others, plus our officer, to Key West, Florida, to the U.S. Fleet School down there. And we were there for 6 weeks uh, learning our trade. And that was quite an experience. First off, we got down there 2 weeks after they took the barbed wire off the beaches from the Bay of Pigs episode. They, in the school itself, because it was highly classified, in the school, there was a special wing that you had to pass through green doors to get to. And those green doors were guarded by Marines. So once you passed through there, we went to our classrooms. We didn't have lockers to put our books and everything in. We had safes. So they were all kept in safes. And once we were in there, we could talk, of course, about what we were learning. But once we passed out of those green doors, we could not say anything about what we were learning. It was that top secret. At that time, they didn't have accommodations for women on the base. So we were in a private motel that was that had kitchenettes. And we had bussed over to the school 5 days a week and 3 evenings a week. And yeah, it was quite an experience.
And once you were finished training, what did a typical day in the life look like for you?
Well, when we got finished our training, we flew back to Halifax and then were sent right to Shelburne, Nova Scotia, the base there, which was there were 2 Canadian bases that were involved in SOSUS. Shelburne, I think Argentia in Newfoundland came on later than the one in Shelburne, but Shelburne was the only one in the whole system that was run by a Canadian officer. The rest of them were all run by Americans. So this was strictly we liaison, of course, with the Americans, because the SOSUS was basically their system that they developed. Typical day. That's really interesting because we change shifts every 3 days. So we start off working. What did we work first? I think it was the day shift. So we work 8-hour shifts from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. Then we'd have, the evening off. We could do what we wanted at the base pretty well. Where we went for our shifts was in a special building at the lower part we were on a bit of a rise, a bit of a hill, and it was at the lower part because it was near the cables from the hydrophones were connected to this building. Excuse me. And there was no windows in the building at all. It was all, under fluorescent lights. The computers, you may think back to some of these old movies where you see these great big cabinets of computers with the large round tapes and so on. Well, we had a room filled with that. That was our computer center. And so we'd be working in there. Then when we came out from there, of course, we couldn't say anything about what we were doing. The Wrens were the ones who did the primary work. There were guys on the base, and usually they were sent there when they finished their basic training, but they hadn't been assigned a ship yet. So they were doing what I call Joe jobs, where they do maintenance or they do garbage collection or just, some patrol, just some minor stuff. So, but it was the women, the Wrens, that ran the important part of the job, with a few of the men officers that, were in charge. So we'd have 3 days, then we'd have 24 hours off, 3 evenings from 4 till midnight, 24 hours off, 3 midnights from midnight until 8 in the morning. Then we'd have 24 hours off, and then it'd start all over again. And I did that for almost 2.5 years.
Oh.
So it was it was a constant routine that way. But in the meantime, because we couldn't talk about what we were doing, it left us free to enjoy other activities and so on. We had, excuse me, when I first went to the base, we didn't have our quarters um, building ready yet. So we were housed in Quonset huts. But the quarters were finally built, and it was unique because the main floor was for the males, and the second level was for the females. So we're all housed in the same building. We used to, one thing that was great about working shifts is for meals, especially breakfast. You could have 2 breakfasts. If you were working the midnight shift, you go in and have a big breakfast, bacon, eggs, ham, the whole bit, before you went down for your shift. And then when you came up from your shift, you could have that all over again. So it was great. Food was great. We used to visit, deal quite a bit with the people in town. There was a little theater group in town. Some of us on the base were involved with. There was dances. My girlfriend Pat and I, we used to go to the dances in town Wednesday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. And so if you were working midnight, for example, and you were out at the dance, they had buses that went from town, called a duty bus, that went from the base to town and back again. And you'd be scrambling for that last bus to get back in time. You go through the past the guard at the gate, and you'd be running like crazy to get to your quarters, get into your uniform, which you'd laid out on the bed, and run down the hill to get in there in time. And another thing, at most of the other bases, there would always be inspection. And we had inspection at our base too, where they come around and examine the rooms and so on. And, but because we're on shift work, if you were working midnight, you can stay in bed because you'd worked the whole night. Well, they'd just finish going by. We'd be under the covers in our clothes. And as soon as they passed by, we'd go running out and go do what we wanted to do, go into town or whatever. So yeah, that was a bit of, we had a little bit of leeway for stuff like that. But one thing that was kind of sad about the whole thing was if we were sick, or if we had any kind of like a medical problem of any sort, we could not tell our sick, we used to call them sick bay tiffies, our medical personnel on the base. We could not tell them what we were doing. So it was sometimes hard to get the kind of treatment that we might need if it was specific to the job that we were doing. For example, we had a lot of carbon from that came off of the equipment that we were using. And in fact, sometimes I'd come up from a midnight shift looking like I worked in a coal mine, because so all that carbon in among the lungs and everything, that was not exactly a good thing. But it was, none of that could be recorded on your medical records or anything. At one point, the powers that be tried to get specialized pay for us, but it was denied because because it couldn't be described. The type of work that we did could not be described, so they wouldn't allow us to get the specialized pay. So that was one of the sort of hindrances that we dealt with. But it was a matter of, there was a lot of camaraderie, good times, as well as the hard, serious times. one thing that was beautiful was one morning I'd been working a midnight shift and was walking up the hill to go back to my quarters, and we looked, of course, we're right out overlooking the ocean, and the sun was shining. It was a beautiful day, and there was a pod of porpoises going by in and over the water. It was just magnificent. And then another time, we're in the middle of a hurricane. We get the tail end of a hurricane, and we could see all these waves crashing up against the lighthouse just across the way from us and everything. It was interesting times.
Interesting times for sure. What would you kind of touched on a few challenges that you faced? What would you say would have been the biggest challenge about your work as a Wren?
That's a good question. Well, one thing for me, and this sounds really silly, but I looked rather young for my age. And at 18, I had a couple people think that I was 13. And it's, getting to be taken seriously was a challenge. Trying to stay up on all the things we had to learn to work on the equipment and so on. They were always, the Americans would come up, send a team up, and they would test us for our readiness and so on. Like they would come in and maybe they would turn off the lights and would see how we reacted that. Well, we always had battery operated lanterns and so on there. So to see how fast we worked with that, or they'd have someone pretend to all of a sudden fall down as if they'd been injured or had a medical problem, and see how we deal with that. I believe that the odd time we had a few classes in Russian, but I don't remember too much about that. And then, of course, if you weren't working on the equipment, you were cleaning the floors. And I don't know, you're probably too young to remember them, but in the schools, they used to have these big scrubbers that were big round disc and had pads underneath them, and they used to run these all over the floors. Well, when I was doing that, that was a bit of a challenge because I was only 98 pounds at the time, and this thing I think weighed more than I did. So, but I don't know, there didn't seem to be any real challenges so much as I can recall, but maybe that was because I knew what to expect as far as discipline and the way of life. So some that went through basic training that had never had that kind of discipline, maybe had lived on their own or something, it was a challenge for them. One thing that I found was a I don't know as much as it was a challenge as it was something that used to irritate me and still does, is when I served, which was in the early 60s, we were not allowed to wear slacks unless you had special permission. And especially in basic training, um, our group we'd all be in work groups and so on in our dungarees and so on. The guys went to lunch, say, they would just march down there in the way they were. By the way, everybody marched. You didn't walk anywhere, you marched. But the Wrens had to go back to their quarters, get into their uniforms with the skirts, the nylons, and so on. Then they could go to meals. They couldn't just go in their dungarees. So that was, it wasn't until a lot later that we were able to, they changed the uniform and allowed women to wear pants and so on. Except that's one thing that I liked about Shelburne as well, because we were dealing with the equipment that we were and so on. Those of us that were in Shelburne were outfitted with a different uniform for there that we were sent to Tip Top Tailors, and they tailored us. It looked like the army battle dress, with the jacket that had the belt at the I don't know, sort of like not a bomber jacket, but anyway, we had the fitted slacks and the jackets and so on, and then we wore the type of shirt like the male sailors had, this white square one with the blue stripe around the edge of it. So yeah, I like that because I'm not a skirt person.
Yeah, you're probably the best looking group on the base. And we did have a number of people submit questions wondering about what it was like to keep that part of your life, all the work that you did, secret for so long.
Well, I didn't really think about it. I just knew that it had to be that way. And I wasn't really one much for gossiping or doing, things like that. So, and I guess too, the discipline that I learned from, growing up in a military family and so on, um, I just, it just sort of became second nature to me. And it wasn't until after the Cold War was over and SOSUS essentially became obsolete that we were allowed to talk about it and say what we did. And it's funny because it wasn't until about 2013 when I was reading about an article in a Legion magazine that mentioned what we did. It was called Serving in Silence. That it really dawned on me the importance of what we were doing. It was such a vital service. So I guess ignorance is bliss.
Back during your service in the Cold War, whenever you were out with family or friends, what did you tell them? What were you able to tell them about the work you were doing?
Just said it was oceanographic research. We were just studying the oceans. That was the cover. So yeah, and and as far as my family went, they never even knew what I was doing. And they were back east. They were in Ontario, and I was in Nova Scotia. So I didn't see them that much. I went back east to visit my sister once on leave. But that's a picture you showed of me in my summer uniform. But no, it wasn't. It wasn't that hard to keep. That part of my life is a secret.
And working with SOSUS, we've kind of mentioned it a couple of times. Do you mind just giving a very brief description of what SOSUS was for anyone in the audience who might not know?
Okay, SOSUS was sort of developed by the U.S. Navy and was worked on in conjunction. Canadian Navy worked in conjunction with that. Originally on the East Coast, and then later on there were some stations on the Pacific side, though not in Canada. SOSUS means Sound Surveillance System. And there would be a network of hydrophones, which are like huge microphones down on the ocean floor, and they were connected by cables to land facilities, and they would pick up sounds from the ocean. And what we would do is we would analyze those sounds, which be transmitted into thermal paper on our equipment, and we could determine whether it was a 2-cycle, 4-cycle diesel engine, or whether it was a nuclear submarine, just by the way the images were on this thermal paper. So that's it in a nutshell.
Did you ever have an instance where one of the connections got cut off?
Not that I'm aware of. But we did have times when, if there was a big storm at sea in the ocean, there would be so much noise generated that the image would blank out. But that was from there's just so much sound. And one thing that we had to watch for too, because as I say, um, we'd pick up 2-cycle and 4-cycle diesel engines. Well, there were a lot of fishing boats out there, and they had their main engines, their auxiliary engines, the engines to put the nets out and so on. And they wouldn't be just one boat out by themselves. There'd be fleets of boats, sometimes up to 12. And that's where we had to be especially vigilant, because that's where the submarines would hide underneath there in order to hide their sound. So it was, you had to really watch. So
Wow. Do you know how close to our coast any of these Soviet submarines got?
I don't really know. Now, I know during the Second World War, there were German subs right in St. Lawrence River. And there's no reason to believe that the Russian subs wouldn't try and do something like that. I mean, it's they'd try and do as much as, get as close as they could, do as much as they could. And then they didn't have to be quite as close when they started using ballistic missiles and so on. So there were longer range missiles, and yeah, so that's why we always had to be, there was always someone on duty 24/7, 365 days a year, always. And yeah, because the potential of it taking out any of our capitals or anything was real. It was there.
Were there ever moments that you felt afraid of what could happen?
I was 18 to 21, no. We're invincible at that age. Uh, no, there wasn't really. We knew what we were doing was important and was serious, but I personally never thought about being in danger. Though, when you sign up for the military, you swear your allegiance to the country and to the Queen, and you're willing to give your life. So you knew what to expect. But during that time, no. As I say, you're carefree at that age. Terribly naive. A lot of us, I was. And so you don't think about that. You don't think about the danger.
There was never a moment where you wanted to change your mind?
No, never, never. I was very, very proud about doing it. Um, I was only in for the one enlistment, the 3 years. Then I got out. But I was so proud of the fact that I served, and I was so glad that I did.
Is there a moment that you're most proud of in terms of your service as a Wren?
Hmm. One thing I was kind of proud of, and here I'm just bragging a little bit, is that when I was doing my trades training, and we had that 3-day engineering course that I mentioned. After we finished the course, we were doing just general duties around the base, and I got a call to go see the commander of the engineering school. And I thought for sure that I had flunked out so badly that, they were going to kick me out of the service. So I had to get in my best uniform, marched over there, and went into sit down with the commander. Turns out I got 98% on the exam, and he had never seen a Wren do that well, and he wanted to meet me. So that was a highlight. And but it was just the whole lifestyle was so I was so proud to be part of the service. I really, really was. Yeah.
What did you end up doing afterwards?
Well, as it turned out, when my enlistment was just about up, my old high school back in the Ottawa Valley had developed a special commercial course, which was 4 years of business courses all in one. And because my parents were still taxpayers in the area, I was able to go to that and not pay any tuition whatsoever. All I had to do was buy my books. So I left Halifax on the late train, got into Ottawa at midnight, and started classes that day at 9 o'clock. And I was in school with kids who were in grade 9 when I graduated. And technically, this was in September. Technically, I was still in the Navy until October the 14th of that year. So it was yeah, and I was really glad because I concentrated on that, and then I've had several different jobs since, and it's been quite a full life.
We had a few people who submitted questions also wonder, with the recent events in Ukraine, as someone who worked during the Cold War, was there anything that you did during that time to stay positive, given the stressful situation that you found yourself in?
Danced. With dancing. We didn't stress about what was happening. It's not the same as what's happening in Ukraine now. It was a totally different kind of atmosphere. There was tension and so on, but down at the level that we weren't involved in that part of the tension and so on. We just did our job, and you know, went to the beach, went for walks, just it wasn't like we were in any kind of imminent danger. So it was a different set of circumstances. So it was just you just had a positive attitude.
Do you know, or do you know how how do I want to word this? How close do you think the U.S. and the Soviet Union actually came to a real conflict, a hot conflict, let's say?
Very close. Very, very close. Yeah, it was fortunately the negotiators did their job well and averted it, but it was very, very close to being a third world war. So yeah.
Do you see any similarities or parallels to what's happening now?
Well, there are a number of differences now. For one thing, and this is my opinion, the Russians are trying to take Ukraine, which used to be Russian territory, and it's not a NATO nation. So NATO nations can't really go into that country. So there's a different scenario for standoff there. Personally, I think that Putin is a little bit mad. And I don't think Khrushchev was quite in that mental state. And during the Cold War, it was the Russians trying to take communism and missiles right into the backyard of the Americans. So it was a totally different kind of circumstance. So, do I think it could possibly lead to a third war? Possibly. I don't know. It just depends how far it escalates. If Putin decides to go into NATO territory, then yeah, I can see it. But it's hard to say. Really hard to say. You just have to wait and hope and pray that things de-escalate.
Mhm. And as a memory project speaker, you do a lot of speaking events at schools. Why do you think it's important for students to learn about past conflicts and history?
If you don't know what's happened, you can't prevent something happening in the future. You have to know what has gone on, because that has an impact on things day to day now. And you need to learn from the past. You don't need to dwell in the past, but you need to learn from the past.
And I noticed a member of our audience has a question. Are you open to taking questions from the audience, Gwen?
Absolutely.
Alrighty. Gwen, are there any stories that you want to share that we haven't, discussed at all yet?
One thing I'd like to mention is, and it's not just for Wrens, but any veterans who served during the Cold War have never received a medal for that. Volunteers who were in earlier wars and so on all received medals. Those of us that served the regular enlistment and were honorably discharged, there is absolutely nothing to recognize that that we served. And we've tried for years and years to get a Canadian military service medal, but to no avail. So that would be great if we could have something. I would love to pass that on to my granddaughter. And one other story is, for part of the training we had for my trades, there was a course in chemical, biological, and nuclear defense. And one of the things we did for this, besides firefighting and so on, is we had to learn about using gas masks. So this was down in Halifax in February, where it was really cold and a lot of snow. And they had this little sort of square cement building. So we went in groups of 5 and did exercise wearing our face mask and so on. And they had a gas pellet on a hot plate, which was tear gas. So we did our exercises and so on. Then we went out of that little building. They opened up the doors to kind of dissipate some of the gas and ease it out. Then, to show the effectiveness of the mask, we had to go through individually without our mask and say our name, rank, and serial number. So, being the smart aleck that I was, I thought I'll take a huge breath before going in. And I said, my name was McDerby at the time, so Gwendolyn Marie McDerby, W53414, and went through. Well, I got to the door going out, and I couldn't hold my breath any longer, and I took a big gut. Well, I have to be right beside the hot plate with the gas. I spluttered and I coughed. And do you know when tear gas gets wet, it stings? So the tears were streaming down my face. My face was stinging. I was blustering and so on. So yeah, I wasn't such a smart aleck after all. But it's one of those things you learn.
And
Wear your gas mask.
How did your experience shape your life, and how might you have been different having not been a Wren?
Oh, that's a good question. It furthered my understanding of discipline and camaraderie and learning how to treat other people. I learned a great lesson about how you treat people always comes back to you. If you treat them with respect, with decency, and just common courtesy, that'll come back to you. If you look down on people and so on, that'll come back to you too. So something I've learned and I've carried through all my life is yeah, respect people around you. So I think that's about it.
That's fantastic. So we'll kind of bring this to an end. We'll wrap it up a bit here. I would like to thank everyone for joining us and for submitting some very thoughtful questions. And of course, a huge thank you to you, Gwen, for spending
My
this time with
pleasure.
us and sharing your stories, answering questions.